Okay, here we are. Friday, everyone. Welcome to today's episode of the Daily Sib. It's been our bumper SMA week that having thought that there would be non-SMA people, it's been everyone, but lots of different people from different backgrounds and different experiences. And today, my good friend Shrin's joining. So good to see you, Shrin.
Hey, good to see you, Martin. Anyone would think you may have SMA with all of these SMA folks
I know,
coming on,
right?
right?
It's crazy. It's
What a
crazy.
coincidence.
I can confirm that certainly Mondays, and I think a lot of next week is not for the diversity of disability. But I mean, and Jane Campbell was on yesterday. I know you caught some of that, Shrin. I mean, what a fantastic woman, first of all, right?
Yeah, extraordinary. And I think, for anything that me and you have done, sort of we owe it so much to the work that she did to open the doors for me and you to be able to have an education, and so many of the opportunities that we have was started by the work of people of her and people like her who did so much for disabled people.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, obviously, she's pan disability rights, and
Mhm.
her big thing yesterday was this sort of unifying the community, both in terms of like the political stuff, but obviously there's a big move more recently with the Purple Pound and some of the
Mhm.
stuff that you and I know too well in the business side. That if you bring everyone together more unified, you get more chance for change.
Sure.
But she's also very vocal that, and back to the previous point, SMAs are pretty out there and we're quite a feisty bunch. So have you got any thought? I mean, have you got any thoughts
Yeah, I
on?
mean, it's always an interesting balancing act, right? Like unity is very important, of course, and I think there is always a certain strength in numbers, but equally, it's just making sure that within that unity there is respect, sort of for other voices and different opinions, and sometimes again we've both seen it in some shape or form that sometimes people from who are maybe haven't like got the confidence to speak up, or maybe from an underrepresented group, sometimes those voices are lost. So I think that's the art of good leadership, right? So where you have unity but also making space for different opinions at the same time.
Yeah, yeah, and to that end, there will be non-SMAs next week. It's been great, and as I say, the diversity of people has been lovely in terms of
Mhm.
there's politics, there's been a lot of the sort of blogger influencer stuff, and today we're going to talk more about tech startups. Just a couple of comments already coming in. I think you'll like this one. So Chris is saying, "Afternoon, chaps. Is Shrin in Nando's?
I wish.
I bet you're clucking for a
Yeah,
Nando's,
first
right?"
thing when lockdown finishes, right? I think we're me and you, mate. We're off to got to get ourselves a Nando's, right?
Well, I've got Nando's sauce in the fridge, so even like in a spaghetti bolognese, I have Nando's sauce. I'm addicted to Nando's like you. So yeah, are they totally? Are they not delivering or anything then?
I haven't even looked, to be honest, but
No.
it's when lockdown finishes, yeah, but it's high up on the list, right? We're gonna have to celebrate.
It'd be like the crazy iPhone launches, like camping outside. That'll be you at Nando's, right?
Yeah, you know me too well.
So yeah, obviously, moving into tech world, and everyone watching, feel free to give your updates if you've got any updates and general thoughts and questions for Shrin today. I'll try and keep an eye on LinkedIn because those questions unfortunately don't come up on the software, but Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube it will come up, and I'll bring it up on the screen as well. But yeah, I mean, Shrin, let's kick us off as usual with the bit of the raised by wolves, the backstory to
Okay,
who
sure
you
thing.
are.
So I guess in a 30-second
Yeah,
nutshell,
perfect.
from London, originally sort of trained as a corporate lawyer, in London, did that for 4 years, but got a bit bored, and wasn't for me in the long run. Went back to university again, and just before that, traveled where we traveled together if to around America. We had the most amazing time, but I think we both saw how difficult it was to travel if you
Yeah,
if you have accessibility needs. And I think for
or a
both of us,
pandemic.
or a pandemic, exactly. But definitely drove home for both of us that there is so much needed in the world of accessible travel. And technology could do so much to help that, and I think planted the seed for both of us later on down the line that we can build useful things within this area. So, started to kind of learn to code and build products and work with you on starting DH, and sort of started the Runaway Train that kind of became what it is today. And in 2015, co-founded Accomable with you, and to build like an accessible travel platform for people who need accessibility. And we exited to Airbnb in 2017, and since then, for 2 years from so January 2018 till recently was living in San Francisco, building out this new sort of team and division at Airbnb. So I'm still at the company and sort of support the accessibility team, but now actually my focus is on building our partnership with the Paralympics. So we are a sponsor of the Paralympic Games, Olympics and Paralympics till 2029, I think, or 2028. Sorry.
That's a long-term partnership.
Yeah, it's a long-term partnership, and helping and just getting started on building out our program over that period.
Yeah, no, that's awesome, but very.
And moved back to London,
which
is nice. Yeah, exactly. And now back in London, which has been great.
Yeah, good to mention that part. So yeah, I've definitely a few interesting things to unpick there. I think. Well, I mean, we could sort of go back to the first couple of things you said. So, like, I gave a talk at the Online Disability Show yesterday. It's a bit like NAIDEX, but they're doing it through a Facebook group, and it was quite a cool concept, obviously, with all the lockdown. And I was doing my Raised by Wolves talk with slides and all that. And the slide popped up of San Francisco when we were by the Golden Gate Bridge, and it was that trip where we did think up the idea of Disability Horizon. So, can you give a little bit more about some of the challenges that we faced on that and similar trips, and then sort of how you saw it that tech could be the solution?
Sure. I mean, we just have to think back to that evening in Los Angeles, right? We turned up to that hotel. We both had, spent time making sure that we were getting the accessible room, but albeit for us to turn up at that place and it wasn't the accessible room. And I think we ended up just sort of, making do that day. But for neither of us, it was a comfortable experience. And we had booked something on, the knowledge, thinking that it was going to be the accessible room, and it clearly wasn't. And this has not been, it wasn't the first time that either of us had been through that, and it is unfortunately
in Vegas as well. I remember
in Vegas,
they did sort us out. To be fair, you could argue
they got you something like the penthouse suite, right? Because I went and argued with them.
Yeah, it could have worked out worse there. And then, as you say, LA was the opposite. Like, we couldn't even get a shower, right? So
exactly,
it was almost
there was.
extremes.
And, it was just, I think we turned up there pretty late at night, and it just wasn't practical to find somewhere in the dead of the night. And I think this is unfortunately an all too common experience for disabled people, even in 2020.
Yeah. So before we go into like Accomable, and which I'd say was a lot more of a tech startup, Disability Horizons used tech, and it was kind of a startup, but it's always been very challenging to find the business model for Disability Horizons. But I think, as you say, the Runaway Train references, it's gone on to do a lot of amazing social good and social impact. So, when we had those experiences, good and bad, on the travel, just chat for a bit more about sort of where DH as an idea came from.
Yeah, and I think, when we were sort of road tripping around California, I think we were thinking about, what, like we've learned so much, we've gathered so much information. Could we create something where people can share their stories and share like amazing knowledge or know-how that they may have about the world to inform, educate, and sometimes entertain others.
Yeah. So it was very much about that kind of the message of like almost would you say rewriting the narrative a bit of disability?
Possibly. I think it was definitely an era where instead of it being, something to feel sad about, like, I guess we were talking a lot about lifestyle and just way of life and doing fun things, and maybe venturing away from some of the more usual kind of discussions that disability was always anchored in, to kind of sort of talking about disability in a more kind of lifestyle context.
Yeah, well, I remember we made a very clear decision not to get into the politics and the activism, and it wasn't
And it
because
wasn't
we were
because
ignorant to it.
exactly. It's not because we were sort of discounting it. It was just actually there is space to talk about things, to talk about like other things, and in a community there are a variety of important topics to discuss. And I guess we started more on topics focused around lifestyle, leisure, and just general day-to-day sort of fun living.
Yeah, and so bringing it to the tech side, I think like you definitely were way more leading on the tech side of it, and I was more around the sort of marketing, and that was where it fitted together really well.
Unfortunately, I'm always the nerd, right?
The Nando's nerd, I like that.
The Nando's nerd. Okay, I'll take that one.
But yeah, I mean, in terms of with DH, what resources tech-wise were needed, and also what challenges were there to get in them?
I think we were very fortunate at the time that there were the beginnings of tools like WordPress and these sorts of open, easy to use online platforms where, fine, even though I could do some technical things, it's when you have so much ready-made infrastructure there, we could very quickly spin up a blog, magazine, and make it look, somewhat half decent, make it look authentic, and that sort of professional grade, basically, and that we could spin that up for practically nothing. And combined at the same time with social media really taking off, you've got the ingredients there where all the different sort of pieces of the infrastructure are available, very easy to put together, and you can build platforms to help tell your story very quickly.
Yeah, I mean, at that time, I remember that charities, who have always been the main, almost to use that buzzword, influencer, they've always been more the key influencers, even like the gatekeepers in the disability world. They just weren't grasping and grabbing at the whole bloggy content, social media world, and they had and still have massive budgets. And we set up Horizons with basically zero.
20 quid on like buying a domain name, right? I think was sort of an incredibly expensive capital investment cost.
Yeah, I mean, that was a big thing I was talking about on the talk yesterday, is like people get het up about, well, like how do I build a website? What sort of like gear do I need, like a camera to do videos and mics and lighting? And if you end up down the road where you've got brand partnerships for like hundreds of thousands, great. Go get like another camera and a microphone and a light. But with laptops and even like smartphones, it's sufficient to create good content, right?
And at least get some early stage stuff, and I think one of the key things about any sort of startup is to sort of validating the underlying solution that you are putting forward in a very sort of scrappy, simple, low-cost way. Not because you're going to build something amazing like from the get-go, but at least testing whether people are going to use it or not. And yeah, you're right. That doesn't need any substantive investment more often than not. Sure, if you're like if you're building something with expensive hardware, like the flying car is not going to be cheap to sort of prototype, but a lot of kind of more software-y, kind of more content, or sort of those sorts of things are probably are easier to prototype.
Yeah, no, totally. And I think your point about the advent in sort of apps and softwares that are either free, or like the software I'm using today, I am paying the subscription because I want it to go to more than one social media channel. But if I just did it to one, it would be free. So there's that kind of the freemium, and then you can start to pay more subscriptions. Like with Horizons, the MailChimp email newsletter, eventually we got big enough that we had to start paying.
But the early stage, most of the stuff we used was free. I think apart from spending a few quid on like a WordPress subscription, I don't think there was much more than that.
And even the design, right? To have a little bit more of a talk through the design stuff, because there's a lot of off-the-shelf options there now.
So, I mean, in the early days for DH, we used a free template to see whether anybody would want to read the articles that me and you had written or had sourced from people that we knew. And then, later on, we worked with AJ and the team at Misfit to come up with a more sophisticated template. But that was only like many months later, after we had sort of validated that people were actually reading the content that we'd put together.
And in a way that you can see there's layers and steps. So it's not prove a concept and then storm the market. It's more prove the concept and then you get partners that are interested, and you might get grants, and you might get, and we'll talk a bit about that when we get to Accomable anyway, but you almost, it's not from zero. Well, there is that book 0 to 1, isn't there? But generally there's that kind of a couple of steps to get it gradually moving, and then if the stars align, it can blow up afterwards.
Exactly. It's sort of building things step by step, and with each stage trying to de-risk things a little bit more. And sort of with every step of de-risking, it sort of makes it easier to then work with an external party to getting you to the step above that.
Yeah. And so you've obviously mentioned that you'd studied and been involved very much in the law world before we did what we did with Horizons and Accomable. You did an MBA at Oxford as well, didn't you?
Yep, that's correct.
So like, how do you see business, tech, and even the law, particularly like from your skill sets? How do you look at them all fitting together when you're doing like a tech startup?
Good point. Good question. I think with all of these things, you see the dots joining together always sort of in the retrospective rather than at the time. Like,
it's just chaotic, crazy.
Like most things, you're like, oh yeah, this seems like a good idea, and you just sort of you follow your interests and follow the things you want to do. But it's only sort of after the fact do you see like, oh, actually, do you know what? All of these things join together to have value. So, look, I think with law, it's about detail and analyzing and being able to synthesize complex reams of information into something easily digestible. With sort of the MBA world, it was very much like, the good thing about the MBA is that you learn a little bit about lots of different things in business. So, it doesn't turn you into an expert on one thing, but you learn a little bit about a lot of different things where you can have a plausible conversation with an expert in each of those areas. And then sort of, learning to code and build products was, I guess that's the heart of any sort of technical or tech-based company, right? It's building product, and so it was a mixture of like being able to zoom in and out of detail, knowing a bit about lots of aspects of business, and sort of learning how to build products. I think it nicely came together later on down the line, and with some of the things that I do today and would like to carry on doing going forward.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I definitely agree. When you look back, it kind of makes sense, but when you're going through it,
nothing ever makes sense at the time, but it always, I think that's human nature, right? We sort of, we after the fact, we tell ourselves, yep, sure, everything always made sense.
Yeah, no, I totally agree.
And so, hindsight.
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to say, like, if Horizons, so it scaled in terms of its social impact, but it never quite got, as we mentioned, the business model was harder to come by. Obviously we brought in revenues and it covered the costs and all that sort of stuff. But so when you move forward to the Accomable side of things, so again, there was the bit of the MVP, the minimum viable product, and the sort of bits we've just talked about, the iteration and the proof of concept. So I suppose the next part with a business is scaling more, isn't it? Yep. So how can you just talk for a bit more how Accomable went from an idea to being something bigger?
Yeah, and so the first part of that was, building a basic web app, and do you remember those days when I was just sort of bashing my head against the wall
Yeah.
trying to build that initial Rails app, and yeah, we got some initial traction. People started to make bookings, or we were connecting them to property owners. Then the next bit of scaling was raising money, and we were very fortunate to be able to raise that money from a group of angel investors who allowed us to build that team. And so I think I think you can sort of prove concepts in a very sort of scrappy, improvised way. But in order to take things to a bigger level, build a team, make sure that you can hire and employ people and bring sort of extra expertise, and that
Yeah.
the raising capital bit becomes inevitable.
Yeah, and obviously you wouldn't be able to, but you wouldn't want to jump to that until you know the idea. Because
Hmm.
I'm listening to the Intelligent Entrepreneur book at the moment,
Hmm.
and there's a bit in the story where the entrepreneurs have their big idea, and I just saw me and you in LA on the beach talking about create, right?
Yeah.
And it was like a light comes on, and all this energy surges through your body, and you just want to go and do all the research and all the work and just chase that down and do it. But obviously, yeah, if you don't do the proof of concept, you could be caught, a technical term, with your pants down later on, right?
The very technical term, of course. And I think that's the nature, right? That ideas are ideas, and a good idea only becomes a good idea later on. Like I do sort of feel that all good ideas start out neither. I mean, okay, some are obviously bad, but I think ideas just start off as ideas on a very sort of neutral level, neither good nor bad. It
Yeah.
is it is validating them in a way that where people can demonstrate that this is actually needed is
Mm.
what then turns them into good ideas.
Yeah, totally agree. Can you chat a bit more around the angel investors and the funding? Because I think for me that the really very interesting area for people watching is that we know more than ever about the number of disabled people in the world, the
Hmm.
spending power, and the fact that very few products and services and marketing and employment is really truly representative of that, both that number but
Mm.
also that potential, that opportunity. So, in theory, the investors would have been lining up, right? But it
It
wasn't
was
quite that
tough.
straightforward.
My
Yeah.
goodness, I lost count of the number of VCs and investors that I pitched to, and it was tough. Like, I mean, even though me and you saw the clear opportunity, I still think there's still a lot of work to tell that story and to tell that narrative to convince the wider sort of investment and business community that this is a really big business opportunity. And it was tough. And luckily a group was found of individuals led by someone who was very passionate about this area as well,
Mm,
and understood the need through personal sort of disability experience. But to this day, as much as again you like to tell yourself yeah, had it figured out and we were really clever about it, no, we got there was a huge amount of luck, and we can never ever discount that good fortune of finding an individual or group of individuals that cared, because this
yeah.
unfortunately we need more people who are going to invest in this sector and invest in people and invest in helping build new teams and talent to create new products for this market. And I do truly believe, for other entrepreneurs out there listening to this, I still think there's a great opportunity. Fine, we did this job in travel, but there's so many other verticals out
Mm.
there where disabled people just need better products and services, where the status quo is just not serving that need.
Well, that's the beauty of entrepreneurship is disruption and innovation, isn't it? That there's not an incentive for the big incumbents, the current businesses that are leading the market, I should say, to innovate and to try
Sure.
different things because they're getting on just fine as they are. So it takes that sort of entrepreneurship to come up with that new innovative idea.
Exactly, and that is the beauty of startups and building new ventures, that people see a gap in the market, they see a need that is not met, and they build something to solve it. I mean, having said that, look, I mean, me and you both know and have come across large organizations that do care and still want to, they still want to do something because they see the opportunity. But, as we've also seen, probably not enough large enterprises, organizations, and those in sort of the business and investment world are doing enough.
Yeah. I mean, also, like the area I'm much more in is around this inclusive brand marketing. And I know a lot of the big brands, there is this sort of fear of doing it wrong, but there's probably just not enough awareness of the opportunity and what you sort of touched on before. But like, I guess I'm looking on the solution side at how could we get investors to understand and engage more in this world without necessarily them having to have lived experience?
Yeah, and like, great question. And I think some of that, some of the great work that you're doing at the moment in terms of telling the story and like really kind of helping others tell their story and just getting kind of more words out there and more information out there and more stories out there of why this is important, I think is really key. I think, there's a lot to be done on making sure that disabled people are kind of, finding employment opportunities and are getting access to products and services just like everybody else. So I think it's not going to be a sort of turn the light switch on and everything is going to kind of get there, but it's a gradual process of improving inclusion, making sure that disabled people are having opportunities just like everybody else, and work around sort of telling the story and changing those narratives that this is a really important market for people to consider.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Got a couple of things coming in from the audience. So, Michael, I missed a lot. Will there be a replay? Yes, it will be on Facebook and all the other platforms for forevermore, unless Facebook or YouTube go under. So, yeah, it will be available. And Chris is saying, what is the app called? So, I think probably referring to Accommable, but do you want to just clarify the story
Yeah,
again?
sure. So after Accommable was acquired by Airbnb, we took many of our listings and product within Airbnb. So the Accommable as a product is no longer in flight, and many of the features that we had in Accommable are now built within Airbnb.
Yeah, so it's been more integrated, right?
Yep.
And I've got a question on LinkedIn from Gina. Chicken before the egg, product, capital, business development, need the dollars for prototypes. What are your thoughts on that, Shrim?
I think it covers kind of what we were discussing earlier, in that we in the early days of both DH and Accommable, we tried to find ways of validating needs. So at DH we were validating, does somebody care about this content that we are creating? So like, okay, can me and you put an article together? And then I think in the early days of sort of Accommable, it was very much, can we sort of, we know of these listings, we know of these properties, can we connect them to people who we think are interested in listings? And sure, like a little bit of capital was needed, but like, I think we're kind of working in sort of the low hundreds of pounds at the time.
Yeah.
I think the other thing that I think maybe Martin you touched upon earlier was applying for sort of grants and
Yes. Yeah.
competitions. We both spent a lot of sort of time and sort of blood, sweat, and tears in pitch competitions and applying
Yeah.
for grants, and we were very, very grateful that we won the Skull Venture Award back in sort of 2014, 2015. But again, like that was sort of predicated on the fact that we had done work to show that people were interested in what we were doing.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Thank you for that. It was good we touched on the grant side, because I think it's not binary. Like you obviously need some capital, or even like as an individual, you need something for the bills and all that sort of stuff. So
Of course.
there's always a need for.
And we were both doing, and in the early days, we were both doing side jobs. We were we were both freelancing, and it's a case of trying to like earn a few quid on one side and sort of plowing it into sort of whatever we were building.
Yeah, absolutely. A couple of questions coming in. So, Rob, I'm gonna rephrase Rob's question, because he's asking us sort of around, is mainstreaming and integration better, or is there still a place for disability specific, and rather put you on the like specific of a Commable Airbnb, just kind of riff on any market, any industry.
I think it's both, right? I don't think it's a zero sum sort of and or just an or type. It's got to be one or the other. I think there is space for both. I think there are like definitely like mainstream platforms in all different sectors and verticals should make sure that products and services can be used as disabled people. But then I think there is also a very important place for products and services that are more kind of targeted and focused, and catering for certain needs. And I think it's kind of, you want disabled people to have that choice, right? Like I think
it's always about choice and control.
Exactly. Like it's we want to be empowered. Like if I want to use a specific service, or if I want to use a service that's kind of more mainstream, I believe that is an individual choice, and that the sort of the opportunity is big enough for all to be in this place. And in every other vertical, taking disability to one side for a second, in any other kind of sort of group, you will have that there will be services that are everybody, but then sort of making sure that there's enough sort of tailoring for certain groups, or there are like more bespoke specific services for that community. And I think there's space for everybody, even within disability.
Yeah, no, well said, well said. Michael is asking, do either of you know any startups founded by people with disabilities who raised VC money?
I don't. I think at the time with Accommable, I think that was the first, where there was a founding team that was disability led, that raised kind of professional angel venture money. I think that there must have been others since.
I'm going to try and get Hardy on, because I know Kaleidoscope
he will
trying
probably
to move there.
Yeah, great point. He'll probably know in more detail like what's happened since. But I think Accommable was the first, I think.
Yeah, I think you're right there. And I know Michael's working on some stuff in the US around that area, so it'd be great to hear from you, Michael, if you've heard anything as well. Familiar face there, Srin, saying hi to you. Can you see it?
Yeah, I see it. Hey, Liz.
Yeah, so Liz has been editor at Horizons really not long after we co-founded. So with Liz's journalism background, she's been at the helm of all the content and the writers and everything. So yeah, nice for you both to connect via the chat as well. And Mark, Srin, we are a startup called Access Rating. We've already spent tens of thousands of our own money, but now need funding. What advice would you give?
I guess first is sort of what the plan is, right? Like if you're looking to kind of grow quickly and scale, there will need to be access to capital that can facilitate that, and it's usually high risk capital. And if it is sort of high risk or high growth capital needed, there is a need to kind of move more towards like the venture capital world. And a lot of the VC world is based on sort of warm intros and kind of throwing yourself into various sort of startup hubs to kind of meet individuals, meet people, go to events, network, go to pitch competitions, all of these different things where you can start kind of, getting to know people in that world, and start sort of hopefully getting those meetings set up with VCs. If it's less about scale and less about, sort of rapid growth, I mean, that there may be the options of crowdfunding or building sort of products and services within the product that, that hopefully people could pay for in itself. But I guess those sorts of means are just they are slower burns.
Yeah. I guess the big takeaway there is the whole, there's not a one golden, or is it silver bullet? There's no bullets anyway.
Bullet, I think that's the one. Yeah, right.
Yeah. And so it is like you have to just throw a lot of mud at the wall, and some will
Yeah.
stick. It's a bit like football, you know, the more you shoot at goal, the more likely you are to score. And I think
Yep.
you have to try a lot of different things. And there's a big narrative that being an entrepreneur is good with certain kind of disabilities because of the flexibility. But I think it's good to acknowledge it's bloody exhausting, and
Gosh.
sometimes a day job is not as tiring as entrepreneurship.
No, and I mean, you know, like I used to have a lot more hair before this than after this.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the perfect summary of that
Yeah, you
point, I
know,
think.
there's no longer those beautiful flowing locks on my head as before.
And Chris is asking, what is your view of crowdfunding?
I think in specific cases, I think it can be really powerful. I think when you are looking to raise funding in areas where I think that, you know, relatively large numbers of people where they care about sort of the product and service being available, and there's a clear kind of benefit of those sort of crowdfunders getting back in return, whether it be the product or service making their lives better, easier. I think there's definitely a lot of value sort of in that sector, but I think it's just sort of managing expectations. It's like you know, it's sort of crowdfunding the means to raise sort of millions and billions, probably not. But I think if you can get really a bunch of people really excited about what you're trying to do, I think it definitely can be a great source of capital to get sort of up and running.
Yeah, yeah. So we got
But again, it's no silver bullet, right? Like it's not going to be, you know, you post something up and the money's going to flood in. And as you know, when you've done like crowdfunding sort of, you know, attempts, it's a lot of work on building stories and getting your name out there and writing lots of content and building community in order to then sort of get what you're doing out to a lot of people.
yeah, I think that's, you know, we sort of touched on some of the stereotypes of entrepreneurship. I think marketing, people just think like if you build it, they will come. But there's so many other, you know, similar but different products, and there's so much noise online because there's so much supply
But it
of
also trying
content
and
and
failing,
marketing.
right? Like, you know,
Yeah,
you have learned this the hard way. Like the reason you are good at what you do is because you had to try lots of different things and learn the
keep
hard
going.
way. Yeah,
Yeah,
and get, you know, constructive feedback and fail, and then sort of have to sort of, you know, try again and sort of it's I'm sure you've got plenty of stories where you've had to do that, and we both had, and like nothing ever just happens by magic.
no, that's true. And I think the crowdfunding, an important distinction is like, and you sort of intimated it as well, Srin, that, you know, for a tech startup, I think there's something about the people having more skin in the game. Whereas if like when I did it to do my journalism trip around Europe or to get my book, you know, published,
Mhm.
more like creative endeavors, then it's more like you give some sort of personal access
Yeah.
or merchandise, or like, so that I think it depends on what you're crowdfunding for as well.
Mhm. And I think it does go, but I think the one thing I would call out, like you talk about sort of funding, like I think the VC world does need to do a lot more to reach out to sort of communities that are woefully underrepresented in sort of the venture raising world. And it's not just disabled people. There's
Yeah,
so many other groups, whether it be like different race, like, you know, minority race groups or gender, like there's so many like that are underrepresented in fundraising, and like, yeah, the venture world, I think we've both seen it, right, can do a lot more to kind of to build bridges with more communities out there.
yeah, yeah. I mean, it's, we are advocating of disability. We have a disability, as you say. There's, I mean, I
Mm,
spoke to Toby last Friday, and you know, that broader diversity and inclusion. It's similar challenges with different minority groups, and so maybe the solutions are similar as well. And maybe there's a way to have even more unified voice. But back to your very first point, with that respect to difference as well.
yep, exactly.
So a couple of Caroline at SMA UK, another really interesting conversation. Thanks, Martin and Srin. Hi, Caroline. And Chris Daly, I've stopped watching wrestling. Really interesting topic.
Oh, so you haven't told him that, you know, we'll be sort of doing wrestling on Monday?
Yeah, that's to come. That's next week. So we're going to wrap up in a minute, but two questions that have come in. Another quick comment: a day job is a piece of cake. Back to what we were saying earlier. So I think you maybe Rob said he came a bit late. I think you've touched upon it, but what are you up to now? You're back in the UK. Just a couple of updates.
Yeah, sure. So I'm still at Airbnb, but my primary focus is working on our partnership for the Olympics and Paralympics games. So we are a sponsor till Los Angeles 2028, and each of these games, like, it's making sure that accessibility and disability is well represented, and sort of working out what our plans are to promote these issues and causes at upcoming games, and working with both the accessibility at the Olympics, but also the Paralympics organizers at the IPC to reflect that, and then just getting myself re-ingratiated back home in the UK.
I mean, it's kind of just thinking about non-work and social. It's probably good to have got back before this all kicked off, right?
Exactly, and I am very grateful that I did move back when I did. I think it would have been really hard being away from home when all of this happened. So yeah, no, I was very grateful to be back.
Cool, thank you for that. And then it's not so much a question, but I think for me it addresses giving disabled people opportunities through the stuff that we've done. So you'll recognise this fella, Mark, saying great to hear from you both. Definitely influenced my career post university. Thanks for providing a platform for me to share some stories and learn. OG Disability Horizons, Liz included. So yeah, lovely to hear from Mark. And for you, Srin, I mean, sorry, go on.
No, and I think, hopefully, like, those listening and those in the community, like, we started something, and I'm hoping that there'll be many, many, many more things start, that, like, more platforms that will help more people to get an opportunity.
Yeah, but on the specific what Mark said, I know Horizons has been amazing as a voluntary work experience opportunity for people that went on to do other things, and obviously Accomable provided jobs for the team, and Horizons has grown a bit more to have a little bit of revenue more recently. So I think that's great. But yeah, I mean, that was really my last question to you. It was a bit like Jane galvanized the troops around the activism and the politics. Like, just a couple more thoughts from the sort of tech startup, and maybe like what could be good ways for get involved for disabled entrepreneurs in the future.
I think there's a few things. I think there does need to be sort of a galvanizing of sort of tech and disability, and sort of building products for this community. I sort of urge and always encourage people to learn some of the foundational skills that are central to tech. There are lots of sort of intro 101 courses that are free online that can sort of give some of those sort of basic skills, whether it be to design or product building or sort of basic coding skills, that I think is really key. But also just trying things, right? Like, speaking to people and just trying to get underlying sort of validation on certain ideas. And look, it may not work, but it's like there are just the need to sort of take those initial steps forward, and hopefully, whether it be the work that I do or you do and various others, we can sort of build that collaborative network of people wanting to build things in sort of disability and tech.
Yeah, no, well said. And it's obviously at the moment it's weird times with the pandemic, and a lot of the economy's slowed down. Obviously, travel, Airbnb is very impacted, but I think as an entrepreneur side of things, it's a good time to look at starting new things. So I think that's another positive for people thinking about it.
And I do think sort of during downturns, and I don't think it's any coincidence that a lot of great businesses are started in downturns. Yeah. I think it does put a lot of people in times of reflection. I think there is often like very sort of pressing and immediate needs during sort of downturns, that I think does create a great climate for people wanting to build things. But I think on a slightly more macro picture, I think we're all seeing firsthand like the really sad case and situations where people are losing their livelihoods. And I think a lot of that recovery is going to be driven by entrepreneurs building new businesses and services.
Agreed.
And I think just taking that further, I think there is hopefully there is a bit of a reset button going to be pressed, and it's whatever comes next. I think it's going to be really important that more groups are sort of included in that conversation going forward when that reset button is pressed.
Yeah, no, well said. Well, it's be interesting to watch it all play out, and I think there are positives there, and that's been a running theme, that for all the craziness and the fears and the real impact now for people, there's potentially silver linings.
And I think it was an article that you shared with me that because of everybody sort of working from home and disabled people are very dependent, or sometimes we just have to work from home, and actually sort of this pandemic is sort of normalizing sort of working from home and remote working. And I think some of the benefits of that hopefully will be felt by disabled people wanting to find work and who need to work at home.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, listen, mate, good to catch up as always, and to share your wisdom with them. We had a really good turnout today. Someone on LinkedIn was asking again about they'd missed a lot of it. Can it be watched later? Yes, it will all be on all the channels if you want to watch it back at any point. Mark just said, did we win any awards? I'd say that just comes back to the grant, really, wasn't it? It was more that
the Skull Venture Award was the main one at the beginning.
Yeah, so that was that. Chris has mentioned, what do we think of accessibility on planes? I would say come back. It's perfect, actually. I didn't even plan this. I've got Chris Wood on Monday, who is campaigning for wheelchairs.
Exactly, that's another set of challenges. Yeah,
totally.
We were probably less than an hour. We could probably talk about that for hours and hours and hours on end.
Yeah, we've had a few hairy experiences, but yeah, Chris, do tune in on Monday, because Chris Wood will be sharing a bit more about that. So I know you've got to get off, Srin.
Listening to that.
Cool, sounds like a plan. Anyway, yeah, thanks again, Srin. Really good to have you on the show.
Well, thank you for having me.
And everyone, have a lovely weekend. I hope you get to chill out a bit from the day-to-day, whether it's a weekend or not now. Who knows? But yeah, I'll see you all on Monday for the next episode of the Daily Sim. Bye-bye for now.